is that they embrace AI to such an extent they don't need to. Okay, they use AI in everything they do, and whereas my generation, but to be generous to say 25% of us embrace AI to make ourselves better and work with it on a daily basis.
Welcome back to another installment of the Next Gen Case Study Series. On this episode today, we have Patrick Evans, who is the CEO of Silva Cybersecurity, with over 3 decades of experience in that space as a director in business development roles across cybersecurity, IT, and consulting industries. He's led the Silva cybersecurity team since October 2020, focusing on providing robust cybersecurity solutions to various sectors, including banks, healthcare, and government. And he has a background in information systems that he got from the University of South Africa. And we're excited to have him on the show today. Patrick, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Devon. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to get to know you a little bit more here. To start off with, I'd love to get from you a bit of your history, where you came from, and how you landed up as the CEO of Silva Cybersecurity.
You can tell from my accent that I'm not American, right? So I hailed from South Africa, moved here in 2019, got locked down in 2020, which saw the birth of Silva. But if I go back in my history, living in South Africa, we had to do mandatory military service when you left school, conscription, if you wish. And I was afforded the opportunity to be trained as a computer programmer. Back then, it was IBM doing the training, which is probably the best in the world back in the 70s, right?
Mm-hmm.
So having done that, I've run data centers, nothing like today's data centers, but the old big IBM mainframe data centers, then moved fully into programming, and then got an opportunity in 1979 to become an entrepreneur. And we started what was then called a real-time computer bureau. But if you had to contextualize that in today's terms, it was actually a cloud SaaS operation, okay, at a time when there was no internet. So we used real-time computers supplied by Digital Equipment Corporation. We connected them via X25 multiplexers over dedicated lines. But aside from that, it pretty much mirrored a SaaS operation. So people subscribed for a service. They used green screens. PCs were not real in those days. They hadn't been invented yet. And so you had a green screen. You paid per number of green screens you had, not per number of users you had. So different people could use the same green screen if need be. And you paid for the amount of disk storage you utilized. In those days, measured in megabytes.
Wow.
So different to today, right?
Yeah.
And you had free use of every application we'd developed, which are typically financial, what you'd call ERP solutions today, manufacturing, motor dealership, etc. type of applications. And so we learned a lot, which sort of prepared me for what started happening at the beginning of 2010. Okay. When I exited that, I had a chance to help DEC with their business plan for entering the South African market when the collapse of apartheid happened in 1990 and 1991, but realized that there wasn't a space for me in the DEC world going forward, having spent the better part of 11, 12 years in that world. And so I went back to my roots, and it was at a time of client-server computing just starting out. The IDC was calling it decentralized computing environment. It was too complex a term, so the term client-server computing stuck. And I think the thing that characterized it was that computers were moving out of this computer room, air-conditioned with operators, into the general work area. Mm-hmm. And we got involved in 2 areas that we helped define, I think, as initiators of that space. The first was what today is referred to as IT service management. Back then, it was little known. It was only being used in the United Kingdom and in Holland. It was known as ITIL, ITIL, which stood for the IT Infrastructure Library, and it defined a set of best practice handbooks for service support and service delivery if you had your own computer system. Recognizing that it was only relevant at that stage and practiced by the public sector of the two countries I mentioned, and recognizing that South Africa probably wouldn't have an established public sector for the next 5 to 10 years as a transition from an apartheid government to the new South Africa, we decided to commercialize ITIL and IT service management. And we're so successful that our primary market became the United States. And our customers became Hewlett-Packard, Microsoft, Ross Perot, EDS, Remedy, and somehow the IRS, but I have no recollection how we got into the IRS, okay? And that's back in the 1990s. And at some stage, we were faced with a situation of, do we shut down South Africa and move the entire company to America, or do we sell off the American operation? Because I had people on aeroplanes flying between South Africa and the US constantly, every week. And the scale of America was just vastly different to the scale of South Africa. We'd run one course for Hewlett-Packard every 2 years in South Africa. We were running one every 2 weeks in America. So the scale is very different.
Right.
We made the decision to sell off that business. So the person who co-founded it with me in South Africa moved to the States. He lives in Dallas. He's still a friend, and we still work together today. But he today is one of the top ITSM or IT service management practitioners in the world. Voted every year as one of the top 25 thought leaders in the space. His name is David Cannon. So the other thing we started, because it wasn't spoken about in ITIL, was security. It wasn't called cybersecurity then. It was just called security or IT security. And the path we pioneered at a time when there was no internet was what is today referred to as IT governance, risk, and compliance. At the time, there was antivirus companies like Norton and Network Associates, but there was pretty much nothing else. And then with the advent of the internet in 95, 96, you had firewall companies come to the fore. But we'd already been going in security for 4 years by then. So that's where we started. If I had to summarize the direction my career took after that, I started focusing more and more on the security aspect, having such a competent individual in David driving the IT service management. And it was really challenging talking about security in a world where nobody truly understood what the risks were. So we pioneered a lot of stuff, and it took 3 years to really get my first transaction. But when I got it, it was a good transaction. It was $1.55 million. Right? And that sort of set me on a path, ultimately leading to Symantec acquiring my business in South Africa, my security business in South Africa in 2001. And I joined the Symantec team running the African operation in July of that year. And I exited from there in January 2009. And what I'd learned when I look back at that point is I'd become pretty competent at spotting startups. So let's call them early stage companies. And by early stage, I mean anything in its first 5 to 6 years of founding, spotting the ones that were probably going to make it, and then forming relationships to represent them back then in the South African market. And my two big successes were Accent, which got acquired by Symantec, which led to Symantec's acquisition of us. And we partnered with Accent in 1994 when they first listed on NASDAQ. And then when I left Symantec, we spotted Zscaler while they were still in stealth mode. And we successfully partnered with them in 2009, 2010, and were effectively their go-to-market arm in South Africa through 2019 when I moved to the States and sold my shares in that business. Today, Zscaler is themselves in the South African market, but back then they weren't. They operated through ourselves in an entity called One Secure. So that brought me to America. I won my green card in 2012. And underdog as to what we were going to do. My wife and I eventually agreed in 2017 that I should come over and do what I'd always wanted to do, is work a lot closer with the founding companies of security companies, whether they be SaaS companies building platforms or just building tech, which is sold through some kind of channel, distribution, resellers, or the MSP, MSSP channel. And so in 2018, moved here, set up the companies, went back, packed up my bags, and transitioned here fully in 2019, only to have COVID strike in 2020 and everybody go into lockdown, right? But that was a benefit for the security market, which changed our view of security from one being compliance-driven to truly understanding risk, and in our case, business risk. For me, security or cybersecurity solves a business risk problem, not just an IT risk problem. Because people today in business don't always necessarily go through IT to solve their IT challenges. They actually contract directly with SaaS providers or outsource it themselves. And as a result, IT doesn't necessarily always know the full IT environment that is in a single corporation or group of companies. So that's what led me to the path I am today. And we formed Silva during COVID, speaking to some of my former customers during lockdown and saying there's a need to start tackling this from a business risk point of view, not just from an IT risk point of view. So if you want to look at our website, we talk about it is no accident that when one ends up being secure, it's secure by design. By that, we mean you engineer the right solution to fit the business based on the business risk you perceive, of which cyber risk is only one pillar. There's climate risk, there's environmental risk, etc., that goes with every company that works anywhere in the world. So that long story, bringing you to answering your question. Unfortunately, I can't take 3 decades and put it into one sentence.
You were phenomenal at making that concise. I picked up on a lot of there's some bravery and boldness in that story. There's some resourcefulness and resilience. The patience to wait 3 years for a deal to happen. I can't tell you how you are quite literally the poster boy of pioneering something that nobody knew we needed. But now, when we look at the infrastructure that's been created and how crucial the role that you play in it is, it's just so fascinating to have the veil pulled back on that. You were mentioning names that I haven't heard in a long time, Symantec and Norton and all these. I grew up on the internet, and so all these companies, I just kind of watched them all come and go, and I never really had the wherewithal to piece it all together. But your story has really given me a broader perspective of the landscape, and it's incredible that you on that pathway have found the purpose in the work that you're doing. I love that that's a key part of what you do. So tell me a little bit more about now the current work that you're doing with Silva. What are you involved in terms of the kind of day-to-day operations, and what's your main responsibilities there?
So Silva has 3 components to it.
Okay.
As I mentioned, during COVID, I spoke to former customers of mine, and they were all CISOs, so Chief Information Security Officers, and the role of the CISO has changed dramatically in the last 5 to 10 years, right? Cybersecurity today is on everybody's lips. I mean, we've seen something happen in the last 24 hours, while not an attack, is driven by a flaw in bringing new cybersecurity software to market through Microsoft Azure data centers, which has brought airlines down. I've been trying to confirm a booking through VRBO, and I cannot get my emails because of it. It's kind of crazy just to live through this.
Oh my goodness. I just heard about that this morning, actually. It's funny you mentioned that.
So the one side was saying we need to provide a mentoring and a vCISO service to customers who are under-resourced. And if you look at that whole small business and small medium enterprise community, most of them don't have access to the resources they need. And by resources, I refer to people, I refer to money, and I refer to time. If you think of this world we operate in, and you speak to any CISO of any enterprise, they will tell you they've got 30, 40, 50 different technologies they manage and use to monitor cybersecurity and manage cybersecurity. And that's far too many. There isn't a single company that represents the SAP or Oracle Financials for the ERP industry, right? Or Salesforce for the CRM industry. In security, it's hundreds of vendors. And as a result, we have a big problem, which we refer to as tool sprawl and data sprawl. So every tool that you buy has got its own data set with it. They don't necessarily all get put into one common data lake from which every tool then accesses it, even if it has a different perspective or different mission. So you need lots and lots of people to make that happen. And when you're a small business, you just don't have those lots and lots of cybersecurity people to make it happen. So they tend to work more with either outsourced companies or what we typically today call as managed service providers. And if security is critical to them, like a small fintech company, then an MSSP or managed security service provider. Now, in America, there are over 100,000 of these entities. That's a lot. Mm-hmm. So what do? So we provide a vCISO service to companies all over the world. I'm currently providing vCISO services to companies in South Africa, in the US, Florida mainly, and in Qatar, where the World Cup was hosted. In fact, my person there was employed because of the World Cup, and he had previous World Cup experience from South Africa hosting the World Cup in 2010. So they loved, and he's still engaged in that country. Mm. Both of them come out of the telco environment that are doing that. So telco environment is one of the more complex security environments because you go through multiple generations of technology simultaneously. So you think there's 2G, there's 3G, there's 4G, there's 5G, and whatever's coming. And you don't end of life them to start the next one. They're all running in parallel at different price points, etc. And you've got updates and vulnerabilities, and you have to assess all of those constantly. And they can bring down telcos. And we've seen what happened to AT&T breach a couple of weeks ago. Right. So all of these things are at risk. So we've got the vCISO business. But my particular passion, once we'd got the vCISO business operational, was to say, I want to work with startups and help them go to market. And many startups don't have all the bits and pieces necessary to do everything they're going to do one day as a fully established, mature company. So work gets divided up amongst people, and you might well find somebody doing business development who really doesn't have a background in business development.
Right.
So you can try and get somebody to work for you as a 1099 in this country and work for free at risk and pay them commission on what they do. Or you've got to bite the bullet, get some funding and pay them even maybe a retainer and maybe some equity to offset the fact that you're probably lowballing the amount that you're paying them every month.
Right.
And I found that I work today with about 8 different companies in different capacities, all of which are some degree of startup. The most advanced is probably a level B round of funding, but still views themselves as a startup, looking to raise round C next year. But others are really just going through friends and family right now, looking to get an angel investor involved in the next round. So it's a whole gamut. And often I set them up with one of the things I found, sorry to digress for a second, but one of the things I found in South Africa was you could try things in South Africa that are well away from the eyes of journalists and analysts. They just never hit the radar, right? And you can pioneer stuff and get it working without that kind of visibility. So the startups, I tend to take to a very strong partner of mine in the South African marketplace, who's an MSSP, and we build them into a full stack of MSSP products. And if I look at the last 2 years, they now use 5 to 6 of the technologies I represent in their stack and delivering a world-class service so much that they've now opened up shop in the USA as well. Okay.
Oh, that's excellent.
On the back of my recommendations. So I tend to work closely in those relationships, either as a referral partner. In other words, there's no retainer. I'm helping them build their market. And if I'm successful, pay me a commission. But the commission percentage is a good commission percentage because they're not paying me any retainer or any, monthly sum of money. In some, I act as a reseller and some I act as a distributor. So when I do distribution, it's not distribution in the US, it's distribution in countries that they're not represented in. Reseller is typically in the US, where we will take frontline responsibility for supporting a particular product. And every product that we do has got some kind of AI machine learning built into it because that is necessary in today's world. So that we made as a caveat. We won't talk to somebody unless there's some kind of AI ML capability in the product with a view on the future and where this is going.
Wow. Okay. So there's a lot involved in the work you're doing, because it's not necessarily just the cybersecurity part as much as it is taking your tools and technologies and deploying them in more sophisticated ways across different markets.
Correct.
Wow. So in all of your efforts here, I'm curious to learn more about what the customer experience looks like for the people that your business and the businesses that you're serving are serving, if that made sense.
Having spent some time post my Symantec stage, helping start a company in South Africa that became the first Salesforce reseller and implementation partner in South Africa, I was indoctrinated into customer experience.
Ah, okay.
You only have to listen to them to understand you creating a customer experience journey, right?
Right.
Having said that, the second part of that is I got involved in a data analytics startup during the 2010s. And we were asked, when we sold off the Salesforce company, it was bought by one of the big four. And they approached us wanting to build a customer experience data, call it solution. So we got to understand what that meant. And they are one of the bigger, let's call it Salesforce providers in the world at a top big four consulting practice level. So customer experience is top of mind for us. And when you're dealing with MSP and MSSP, especially in this country, especially somebody new to this country who hasn't experienced the many layers that tend to exist in the US, I think for Americans, this is oxygen to them. But when you come as an outsider, you actually learn, even buying fast food, there aren't just 3 or 4 different levels of fast food. There are 20. And you can get some really bad fast food, and you can get some really almost fine dining level fast food in this country. You don't have that where I come from, okay?
Yeah.
So the same is true of MSPs and MSSPs. And early on in 2021, we realized that we were going to make MSPs and MSSPs our focus for go-to-market. In South Africa, because I don't live there anymore, but in America, because increasingly the market is being served by MSPs and MSSPs, especially at the SMB and SME level. But then we started realizing, and I've developed a very good relationship with a person who built an MSSP here in Dallas, and he's educated me in the ways of MSPs and MSSPs. Now, the lines of what is an MSP and an MSSP are becoming increasingly blurred as MSPs start making sure they can cover cybersecurity as well. So one of the things we've done in that space is enable the establishment of a cybersecurity practice for MSPs to be able to deliver a set of MSSP services to their existing customers. And that has been a great experience for us. And it helped us to understand who was really going the extra mile and who wasn't. And you can see some of the outcomes of organizations going the extra mile and those that don't by people who are starting to offshore their practices to reduce costs because they aren't making enough from customers anymore because they're not delivering a great customer experience.
Right.
Now, having said that, not everybody offshores is one of those. So just to be clear, but we have seen people who've spoken to us about the level of service they're getting and rating it as a 2 or 3 out of 10 on the Net Promoter Score Index, moving away, and one of them came to us. And what we did to make sure is we delivered a lot of stuff that they don't pay for as part of the service, bearing in mind that nobody knows us. We came in cold into this market, right?
Right.
And there's one word that's associated with security that has been re-emphasized to me, which we tend to take for granted when you're doing it for 30 plus years, but coming into a market where you really don't know anybody, it got emphasized. If we don't trust you, we're not going to buy from you. So trust is essential in selling a cybersecurity service, okay? And to overcome that trust, we built a framework of engagement that would enable us to very quickly build trust with potential customers in the SMB, SME sector. And that had a number of components that we did at no charge to the customer, but with their permission. So one of the things we do is we take a product that does, let's call it security intelligence, okay, but open source intelligence. So what does your domain look like? Are you being attacked? Are there, passwords being hacked in the past, etc.? So there's a formal vendor or a number of vendors who specialize in the space. We subscribed with one of them, and we produced a report which resulted in a graded scorecard, a report card that everybody who's ever been to school can understand, where your security along 19 different security controls is graded from A+ to F. Now, what we learned very quickly is that if you're a C or less, cyber insurance companies are now questioning whether you are a good risk or not, okay? So they tend to structure their premiums depending where you are between C+ and A+, okay? Now, that becomes a value proposition just in itself, right? So that's what we'd go in with. First meeting, we'd go in with a scorecard for each of the 19 controls and have an honest, open, but directed conversation as to what you're doing well and what you're not doing so well, okay? And we then say, if you're interested in pursuing this conversation, what we will do is a pen test of your environment. And with your permission, and we will then come back in 2 weeks and present the results to you. And again, we'll do that at no cost to the customer. When we present that to them, you typically see the penny dropping. You tend to see that, especially at SMB level, where people are relying on the advice of friends and family, and maybe their kids who are at college, to become their security experts, they're starting to realize how vulnerable they are to an attack. And the problem with, if you're an SMB, is that if you suffer a ransomware attack, the chances are 67% today of small businesses that have a ransomware attack will be out of business in 6 months' time. Okay? That's a scary statistic if you're an entrepreneur.
Sure is.
The second thing is, the first thing that a ransomware attacker does before they activate the ransomware and encrypt your data is they go around looking for everything they can find on your systems, including login credentials. So the next time they come, they can actually just log into your system. They don't actually need to break in the way they did the first time, okay? Which means they have access. And invariably, 80% of small businesses suffer a second ransomware attack because they haven't done what is necessary. So you've got two dynamics happening here. You could be out of business and you're likely to face a second attack. So at that point in time, when the penny drops, we say, okay, the next step, we're going to charge you for the next step. but we want a 3-month contract. This is what we're going to do. We're going to test all your controls. We're going to make sure they work. When they don't, we're going to sort it out. We're going to see all your vulnerabilities. We're going to patch what we need to patch. We need to get you to an advanced level of security posture, a more mature security posture, if you wish. Now, the benefit of that to most American businesses is there is a scale in this country that federal and state bodies measure vendors on called CMMC. And it's graded from, let's say, 0 to 5, where 0 means you don't have a score. 1 is the lowest, 5 is the highest. And if you've got a good score, you can get bigger contracts with increasingly, let's call them more sensitive federal entities and state entities. Okay? So there's a benefit immediately going through this process with us that you can probably be eligible for getting increased revenue. And for that reason, I refer to security today as a business enabler, not as something you need to fear. If you can grasp the spirit of that and see it as a way to enable your business, you're actually going to have a far better respect for what cybersecurity can do for you. And your customers are going to trust you. They're going to give you more business. So we then have a 3-month contract we put in place. We take them through that process. They pay a little amount of money, not a lot. But at the end of what typically is a 4-month experience with us, they sign. And they sign because now they trust us. They've seen concrete results that are represented in quick wins. They're seeing the business enablement angle, and they're ready then to enter into a longer 12-month contract with you for whatever service they need, which could be an MXDR service, it could be an MSSP service, SOC as a service, vulnerability management as a service, whatever it is they really need, we can position it appropriately. And the free services we deliver up front, we continue to deliver for free, which just gives us an elevated perspective from the customer's point of view when they look at us. And they're more than happy to recommend us, which is coming back to your question, what is the customer experience at the end of the day? That's what it looks like.
A remarkable one. It sounds like one worth talking about. And I love that that is a part of the way that you approach doing business. And it's refreshing to know that there are people like yourself out there who actually are giving thought to what those experiences look like. Because as you mentioned, in some of these cases with the bigger companies, the service isn't that great and they're losing customers. And in order to offset that and maintain a profit margin, they're doing worse. And so it's excellent and refreshing to hear that somebody is out there doing the necessary work to lead the charge and all of that. Patrick, you've been very generous with your time and your wisdom, and I can tell you just from my own perspective, I've learned a tremendous amount about cybersecurity. I am enlightened after this conversation. So for that, I'm very grateful.
Very kind words, Devon. Thank you.
Yeah, I love to kind of wrap things up here on a high note. And if I could from you, I wonder if there is a piece of advice that you could offer somebody that's in a similar position, facing similar challenges, that would help them overcome that. What would that piece of advice be?
The interesting thing is something I've learned in the last 4 months. Okay. So I'm a person who tries to do what I do better every day than I did yesterday. Okay. And I recently flew back to South Africa in March and April. I have customers there. And I met a youngster I'd watched grow up from the age of 4 years old. Today, he's approaching 30. He decided to study engineering at Edinburgh University in the UK. But he'd grown up primarily at the feet of his grandfather, who was a very accomplished businessman and entrepreneur on his own. He'd led a number of buyouts. He'd built process manufacturing plants all around the world. He was an engineer himself. So this guy had followed in his grandfather's footsteps. But because it was his grandfather, he was mixing with people who were already chairmen of boards, CEOs of companies, who had recently retired but had a wealth of experience. And he could conversationally, from a young age, hold conversations with those people. But having gone through an engineering degree, he can talk Python to an AI person, okay, and everything in between. And I asked to meet with him and have a meal with him. And I walked away from that conversation realizing that I needed to make AI my companion and not fear it. Okay. And I'm going to give you an example of what I did. So I started, there's a movie out, I think the movie's called Atlas, if I'm not mistaken, which talks about the pairing of humans and AI so that humans can do their jobs better. And they talk about it in a weaponization or warfare context. But for me, it was about if I can embrace AI and machine learning positively, I can probably do my job better. And a stat he shared with me is that as much as us older people tend to say the younger generation, let's call it the generation Z and Y, and my daughter's one of them, don't appear to bring the same work ethic that we had fostered in us. What I've come to realize through talking to him is that they embrace AI to such an extent, they don't need to, okay? They use AI in everything they do. And whereas my generation, it would be generous to say 25% of us embrace AI to make ourselves better and work with it on a daily basis. 75% of my daughter's generation do, okay?
Right.
Which means they've already conquered that fear of working with AI and are getting the practical benefits, the value back. And I decided to test it the other day. I got given a list of cyber insurance companies together with contacts by somebody, and I've got a solution which automates the entire cyber insurance process, okay, as a security process, okay, and to make sure that cyber insurance companies can get a better return on selling cyber security or cyber insurance, sorry. But when I started looking at this list and working at this list, which had, let's say, 500 names on it, I started realizing it was a mix of cyber insurance, short-term insurance, and life assurance. And my value proposition is only for cyber insurance, right? For the carriers and for the brokers. So I sat back and I said, can I use AI to discern this list and break it down into who are the cyber insurance vendors and who aren't? So I went to the same youngster and I said, I need to learn a lesson, how to do this, but use AI to do it. Well, let me tell you, it took 5 minutes, 5 minutes. Okay. Sorry, it took 20 minutes. I lied. It took 20 minutes and $5.
Yes.
Okay. And I had a Excel spreadsheet that taken every single list on it, said they are a cyber insurance broker, they're a cyber insurance carrier, or they've done neither of the above, had given me that report that I could now engage with the guys I really was focused on. $5 and 20 minutes. It would have taken me 2 months of going on Google and looking at each one using the URL address. So I'd recommend to anybody, embrace what AI can do, whether it's marketing, business development, running your business, whatever it is. Look at how you can become a lot more efficient. And I believe the gains are so much better. But be aware that it only takes one bad egg out there to spoil it for you. And that's why this whole cybersecurity business was born in the first place. The bad eggs, okay? But if you embrace it correctly and you do it with ethics in mind, it can do so much good for you and it could be a far better entrepreneur.
Very sound advice. I think anybody that's listening is definitely going to benefit from that and the other insights that you've shared with us. If somebody wanted to get in touch with you, what would be the best way for them to do that?
Easiest way is my email address, which would be pevans@slva-cs.com.
Beautiful. We'll make sure to link to that in the show notes. And for anybody else that's watching, if you want to get in touch with me and my team for any reason, you can visit nextgengrowth.com. Otherwise, that's it for this episode, and I will see you in the next.